Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. In the archives of an old photography studio, tucked away among ordinary family portraits and wedding announcements, lies a Christmas photograph from 1898. At first glance, it embodies everything we associate with Victorian holiday celebrations. A richly decorated parlor with garlands of evergreen, candles carefully placed among the branches of a towering Christmas tree, and presents wrapped in simple paper and string arranged beneath it. The photograph shows what appears to be a prosperous family gathered for their holiday portrait. Their clothing is formal, as was common for such occasions, the patriarch in a dark suit with watch chain visible across his waistcoat, the matriarch in a high-necked dress with intricate lace detailing. 4 children, ranging from perhaps 5 to 15 years of age, are arranged around their parents, faces solemn as was required for the era's long exposure times. But something about this image has troubled everyone who has studied it closely. The parlor contains 8 chairs arranged in a semicircle before the Christmas tree. 8 chairs for 6 people. The composition seems deliberate, not haphazard, each chair positioned with care, as though intended to be occupied. More disturbing still is what appears upon closer examination of the shadows near the edges of the frame. There, in the darkened corners of the room, the photographic plate seems to have captured something. Vague outlines that suggest human forms, transparent yet discernible to the careful observer. 2 such outlines, in fact, precisely matching the number of empty chairs. The family's expressions, initially read as Victorian stoicism, take on a new dimension when studied with this knowledge. The mother's eyes seem fixed, not on the camera, but slightly to its left, where nothing visible appears. The youngest child's hand extends slightly, fingers splayed as if reaching toward someone just beyond the frame. Records from the estate where this photograph was discovered include a journal entry dated December 26, 1898. It mentions a Christmas portrait session the previous day, describing it as a complete family gathering at last, despite recent sorrows. Parish records from the small New England town reveal that 2 members of this family, a teenage daughter and a young son, had perished in a scarlet fever outbreak that autumn, just 3 months before Christmas. Yet the photographer's ledger clearly states the portrait was commissioned for the complete family, all 8 members. The photographer's diary contains a cryptic note that he saw only 6 through the lens, though all chairs were filled during arrangement. The question that has haunted collectors and paranormal researchers since the photograph's discovery remains: did this Victorian family somehow include their deceased children in their Christmas portrait? Were the empty chairs truly empty? And if one carefully counts the faint shadows that appear in the original plate, not 6, but 8 figures emerge. Some photographs capture more than light and shadow. Some capture what we desperately wish to see, or what refuses to remain unseen. The photograph eventually found its way to my desk after passing through numerous hands. As the current archivist for the Meriwether Historical Society, I've examined hundreds of Victorian-era photographs, but none quite like this one. The family was the Winthrop family of Harlow's Hollow, Massachusetts. Before the fever took young Thomas and Elizabeth in October 1898, they had been prominent members of the community. Henry Winthrop owned the local lumber mill, while his wife Margaret was known for her charitable work with the church. I spent weeks researching the family's history, discovering that the Winthrops were not only wealthy, but deeply involved in the spiritualist movement that had swept through New England in the latter half of the 19th century. Margaret's personal correspondence, preserved in our archives, revealed her frequent attendance at seances following her children's deaths. "The veil between worlds grows thin at Christmas," she wrote to her sister on December 15th. "The medium assures us that Thomas and Elizabeth will be present for our gathering. Henry remains skeptical, but I've convinced him to allow the empty chairs." The photographer, one Jeremiah Stone, was himself known in local circles as having sympathies with the spiritualist movement. His technical expertise was particularly sought after by those hoping to capture spirit photography, the controversial practice of allegedly photographing ghosts and spirits of the departed. What makes this photograph particularly compelling is the technical analysis I commissioned. Using modern imaging technology, we enhance the shadowy areas where the spectral figures allegedly appear. The results were inconclusive but unsettling. The shadows contain structural anomalies that don't align with any known camera defects from that period. They appear to have human-like density gradients, particularly around what would be facial features. Even more curious was our discovery in the parish records of Reverend Caldwell's private notes. The Reverend had visited the Winthrop home on Christmas Eve, noting afterward that Mrs. Winthrop has arranged the parlor most peculiarly, with places set for those who cannot possibly attend. Her grief has manifested in concerning ways. The Winthrops' surviving children went on to lead troubled lives. The oldest son, James, would later write in his 1927 memoir about that Christmas, "Mother insisted we behave as though Thomas and Elizabeth were still with us. Father humored her, though it pained him greatly." I still recall the chill that descended on the room when the photographer's flash illuminated us all. Perhaps most disturbing is what happened to the photographer himself. Town records indicate that Jeremiah Stone abruptly closed his studio in January 1899, selling his equipment and moving west. His parting letter to a colleague mentioned only that certain images reveal what man was not meant to see. I can no longer trust what appears before my lens. Whether this photograph captures genuine paranormal phenomena or merely the painful intersection of grief and wishful thinking remains unanswered. But each time I study it, I find myself counting. 6 living subjects, 2 empty chairs, and shadows that refuse to be explained away by rational science. The deeper I delved into the Winthrop family history, the more complex the case became. Last week I discovered a small leather-bound journal wedged behind a drawer in our archives. Margaret Winthrop's private diary from 1898 through 1899. Its pages revealed a woman far more immersed in spiritualism than previously understood. "The children visit nightly now," she wrote on December 20th. "Elizabeth stands by my bedside while Thomas plays with the ornaments when no one is watching. Henry pretends not to notice when the piano plays itself, Thomas's favorite carol echoing through empty rooms." I cross-referenced this with weather records from that December, discovering that Harlow's Hollow had experienced unusually severe electrical storms the entire week before Christmas. Precisely the atmospheric conditions spiritualists of that era believed thinned the barrier between worlds. More enlightening was my interview with Agatha Pierce, now 103 years old, and the last living person to have known the Winthrops. As a young girl of 5, she had attended their Christmas gathering the day after the photograph was taken. "They served 8 plates at dinner," she told me, her rheumy eyes distant with memory. Mrs. Winthrop would spoon food onto the empty plates and carry on conversations with empty chairs. The surviving children looked terrified, but Mr. Winthrop just stared into his wine glass. I remember asking my mother why the chairs rocked sometimes when no one touched them. The Winthrop home itself still stands, though now subdivided into apartments. I arranged to visit the space that once contained their parlor, bringing the photograph with me. The current tenant, unaware of the building's history, mentioned unprompted that her 2 young children refused to enter a specific corner of the room, the precise location where the spectral outlines appear most prominently in the photograph. Perhaps most disturbing was my examination of Jeremiah Stone's camera equipment, preserved in the Museum of Photographic History in Rochester. The glass plate he used for the Winthrop portrait contains unusual chemical properties. When analyzed by specialists, they discovered a compound used in emulsion that Stone had apparently created himself, containing, among other things, crushed bone ash and silver extracted from a church relic. In Stone's hasty departure from town, he left behind technical notes referencing experiments with memory-sensitive materials and capturing impressions beyond visible light. He wrote of consulting with a Swiss chemist who claimed certain minerals could record emotional imprints when properly prepared. The final entry in Margaret Winthrop's journal, dated April 3, 1899, chills me most. Written in increasingly erratic handwriting, it reads, "They no longer confine themselves to their chairs. Thomas stood at the foot of our bed last night, no longer smiling. Elizabeth watches from every mirror. Henry finally sees them too now, though he wishes he couldn't. The photographer knew. His camera didn't create the images. It merely revealed what was already here." The Winthrop family photograph raises profound questions about grief's power to pierce reality's veil. Was this elaborate self-deception by a family unable to accept their loss? Evidence of collective delusion enabled by a photographer exploiting their vulnerability? Or something genuinely supernatural that Victorian technology accidentally captured? Most photographs show us what was. This one forces us to question what might still be. The photograph continues to affect those who study it, myself included. Last night I woke at precisely 3:17 in the morning, my bedroom unnaturally cold despite the summer heat. On my desk, where I'd left the Winthrop family portrait, a peculiar phenomenon occurred. The image appeared to be glowing faintly in the darkness. Sleep-addled as I was, I approached it cautiously. For a moment, though I hesitate to commit this to official record, I could have sworn the figures in the photograph had shifted positions. The two empty chairs no longer seemed empty at all. This morning, rationality restored, I sought scientific explanation. Under ultraviolet light, I discovered the photographer had used a mixture containing phosphorescent compounds in his developing solution, a technique occasionally employed by spirit photographers to create afterglow effects that would manifest in darkness. My research took an unexpected turn yesterday when I received correspondence from a Professor Eliza Montgomery at Miskatonic University. She specializes in Victorian mourning practices and has been studying the Winthrop case independently. The Christmas photograph represents a fascinating intersection of three Victorian traditions, she wrote. Postmortem photography, the Christmas seance, and the concept of reserved space for departed souls, a practice more common than our modern sensibilities acknowledge. Families would often maintain places for deceased members at holiday gatherings, particularly children, as a form of continuing bonds. More unsettling was the package that accompanied her letter, a recording cylinder from 1899. It contained a primitive audio recording made by Henry Winthrop himself, apparently using an early Edison phonograph. The heavily degraded audio required extensive restoration, but we managed to extract 30 seconds of usable sound. Henry's voice, tense and whispering. Margaret insists they are here with us still. I maintained skeptical distance until the photograph arrived. Stone captured something beyond explanation. Now I hear Thomas's spinning top at night, though it sits untouched on the shelf. Elizabeth's music box plays her lullaby when the house is silent. Margaret welcomes these visitations. I fear them. The children in life were joyful creatures. What has returned feels different. The recording ends with what sound analysis experts identify as a child's laughter, too faint to be definitively authenticated but distinct enough to raise gooseflesh on my arms. I've consulted with Dr. Werner from the Department of Psychology about the case. He suggests we're witnessing the documentation of shared psychosis, folie à famille, exacerbated by profound grief and Victorian society's romanticized relationship with death. The photograph didn't capture ghosts, he insisted. It captured a family's collective delusion, made manifest through suggestion and the power of communal belief. Yet evidence continues mounting that challenges purely psychological explanations. Parish records reveal that on Christmas Eve 1898, every clock in the Winthrop home reportedly stopped at 7:43, the precise time Thomas and Elizabeth had died 2 months prior. Tomorrow, I've arranged to meet with Sophia Winthrop, great-granddaughter of James, the eldest surviving son. She claims to possess family heirlooms never before examined by researchers, including the Christmas presents wrapped for Thomas and Elizabeth that appear in the photograph. They were never opened, she wrote. No one dared. They remain exactly as they were that day, still beneath my grandmother's bed. Sometimes we hear the paper rustling. I've arranged the items from Sophia Winthrop's collection on my office table. The preserved presents wrapped in faded paper tied with fraying ribbon, yellowed with age but remarkably intact. The tags still clearly read, "For Thomas" and "For Elizabeth," in Margaret Winthrop's elegant penmanship. They feel unnaturally heavy, the contents shifting slightly when moved, despite a century of stillness. My father made us swear never to unwrap them, Sophia explains, her weathered hands hovering protectively near the packages. He said his mother, James's wife, tried once in 1921. She fell deathly ill that very night, fever and delirium for weeks. Also, among Sophia's artifacts is a silver hand mirror that belonged to Elizabeth. Its reflective surface has tarnished to near blackness, despite Sophia's insistence that traditional cleaning methods have no effect. Sometimes when the light hits it just so you don't see your own reflection, she whispers. It's always a little girl's face, always watching. Most valuable to my research is Margaret Winthrop's final correspondence, letters written in the weeks before her death in July 1899, just 7 months after the Christmas photograph. The decline in her handwriting is pronounced, deteriorating from elegant script to jagged, desperate scrawls. They have changed, she wrote to her sister. At first their presence was a comfort. Now I understand our photographer's terror. They remember being children, but they are not children anymore. Something else wears their shapes, something that was waiting behind the veil. We invited it through our grief. Her final letter, dated 3 days before her death, contains a chilling admission. I destroyed the original negative. Stone knew. He created not a camera but a doorway. The flash of light wasn't to capture an image, but to illuminate a path. Henry says we must burn the photograph, but I fear what might be released. The children stand at the foot of our bed nightly now. Their eyes have changed. They want something from us. God forgive me for what I've allowed into our home. I've sent hair samples from Thomas and Elizabeth's preserved locks, kept by Margaret in lockets, also included in Sophia's collection, for DNA analysis, comparing them with residue found on the back of the photograph. The results were perplexing. The geneticist reported contamination in the photograph samples, the DNA present but structurally abnormal in ways he couldn't explain. Last night I conducted an experiment I've hesitated to document officially. I placed the wrapped presents on either side of the photograph and set up recording equipment, infrared cameras, temperature sensors, and audio recorders. At 3:17, the time I'd previously awakened, all equipment simultaneously malfunctioned for exactly 7 minutes and 43 seconds. When functionality returned, the presents remained undisturbed, but their positions had shifted slightly. The photograph showed no visible changes, yet this morning's scan reveals subtle differences in the shadowy figures. They appear more defined, more present. Most troubling is what the audio captured in those final seconds before equipment failure. A child's voice, distinct despite the static whispering. You invited us to look out. Now we invite you to look in. I find myself questioning my academic detachment. The Winthrops' tragic story began with a family unwilling to release their children. Now I wonder if my persistent investigation risks a similar danger, not of being haunted, but of becoming the doorway through which something long trapped might finally escape. The photograph now sits in a specially constructed case in my office, behind glass that filters ultraviolet light. I've become reluctant to examine it directly, preferring instead to study digital scans, though each new scan seems to reveal subtle differences in the shadowy figures, as though they're gradually advancing toward the foreground of the image. My colleague, Dr. Harriet Lansing from the chemistry department, made an unexpected discovery yesterday while analyzing the photograph's paper composition. Embedded within the fibers were microscopic traces of a rare fungal spore, Cladosporium necroturicum, known in the 19th century as cemetery mold, a fungus that thrives in soil with high concentrations of decomposed human remains. This particular strain, Dr. Lansing explained, was cultivated by certain fringe spiritualist groups. They believed it formed a physical conduit between the living and the dead. The spores were sometimes mixed into photographic emulsions by practitioners seeking to capture images from beyond. The Winthrops community newspaper archives yielded another disturbing connection. 2 weeks before Thomas and Elizabeth succumbed to scarlet fever, a traveling medium named Madame Sylvia Wolcott had visited Harlow's Hollow. She advertised specialized seances for preserving family bonds beyond mortality, and sold mourning parents what she called anchor objects, items that would supposedly keep their deceased children tethered to this world. Margaret Winthrop's bank records show a substantial withdrawal coinciding with Madame Wolcott's visit. What exactly did Margaret purchase from the medium? And did this transaction occur before or after her children fell ill? Last night, I invited Professor Montgomery to examine the Christmas presents Sophia Winthrop had provided. Using non-invasive imaging technology, we were able to determine their contents without unwrapping them. Thomas's package contains a carved wooden train, unremarkable except for the tiny compartment hidden in its undercarriage. Elizabeth's gift is a porcelain doll with an unusual feature, a small cavity within its hollow chest. These aren't merely toys, Professor Montgomery observed. They're vessels, designed to house something. Victorian spiritualists sometimes created receptacles for what they called essence fragments, physical objects that could supposedly contain portions of a departing soul, if present at the moment of death. The most alarming development came this morning. The photograph's glass case triggered our building's humidity alarm at precisely 7:43. When security investigated, they found the interior of the case fogged completely. Condensation on every surface except the photograph itself, which remained mysteriously dry. When the fog cleared, someone or something had drawn 2 small handprints on the inside of the glass. I've made a difficult decision. Tomorrow, I will invite Sophia Winthrop to be present as we carefully unwrap the preserved gifts. Whatever Margaret Winthrop set in motion during that terrible Christmas of 1898 remains unresolved. The photograph wasn't just documentation of their tragedy. It was part of a ritual left incomplete. As I write these notes, the lights in my office flicker intermittently. The temperature has dropped noticeably, and though I sit alone, I cannot escape the sensation of being watched by small, patient eyes, waiting for someone to finally open their long-delayed Christmas presents. The events of the past 24 hours haunt me more than any historical research ever has. With trembling hands and a reluctance my academic training never prepared me for, we unwrapped the preserved gifts yesterday. Sophia Winthrop insisted on burning sage throughout the procedure while Professor Montgomery documented everything on video. Thomas's wooden train contained exactly what we expected: a small compartment lined with tarnished copper, empty save for several strands of golden brown hair secured with wax. Elizabeth's porcelain doll proved more disturbing. The cavity in its chest housed a miniature glass vial containing what Dr. Lansing has preliminarily identified as dried blood, along with a folded paper bearing an inscription in faded ink: "Return at the appointed hour." What none of us anticipated was Sophia's reaction upon seeing these items. Her face drained of color as she whispered, "Those aren't their toys." When questioned, she explained that family photographs from before the children's deaths showed Thomas with a different train, painted red, not blue, and Elizabeth's favorite doll had dark hair, not the blonde curls of this porcelain figure. "These weren't gifts," Sophia said. "They were replacements." Our confusion deepened when she extracted from her handbag a brittle newspaper clipping from January 19th, 1899. It detailed the mysterious deaths of 2 children in a neighboring town, a boy and girl whose descriptions matched Thomas and Elizabeth in age and appearance. They had disappeared while playing near the woods that separated their town from Harlow's Hollow, only to be found positioned side by side, their bodies unmarked, save for expressions of profound terror. The article noted their parents' distress that the children's favorite toys, a red wooden train and a dark-haired doll, were missing from their rooms. The implications chilled us all to silence. Had Margaret Winthrop, in her grief-stricken desperation, somehow attempted to transfer her children's essences into new bodies through Madame Wolcott's ritual? Had she used the Christmas photograph as part of an elaborate summoning, the empty chairs not symbols of remembrance but invitations for occupation? Last night, the university's power grid experienced an unprecedented failure that affected only our building. In the darkness, security cameras briefly captured what appears to be 2 small figures moving through the hallway outside my office. The footage degrades precisely as they approach the cabinet where we've secured the unwrapped gifts and photograph. This morning, I discovered the Winthrop photograph had changed again. The shadowy figures have gained definition to the point where their outlines now clearly show children's forms. More disturbing still, the faces of the Winthrop family in the image have subtly altered, their expressions no longer solemn but contorted in what unmistakably resembles fear. Sophia called at dawn, her voice barely audible. "It's happening again," she whispered. "Last night I heard a train whistling in my empty living room, a child's laughter from my closet. When I looked in the mirror, I saw them standing behind me, but when I turned around, I was alone. The barrier between research and involvement has dissolved entirely. We are no longer studying the Winthrop's tragedy. We have become part of it." The Winthrop photograph has been relocated to the university's high-security archive, sealed within a lead-lined container at my insistence. Yet distance provides no refuge. Last night I discovered every mirror in my home had been turned to face the walls, though I live alone and had locked every door. After consulting with Professor Montgomery and Sophia, we've formed a reluctant conclusion. Margaret Winthrop never intended to preserve her children's memory. She sought to resurrect them through a ritual that went catastrophically wrong. The Christmas photograph wasn't documentation, it was a summoning tool. Today, we met with Elias Wolcott, great-grandson of Madame Sylvia, now a professor of comparative religion specializing in 19th century spiritualism. He examined the ritual objects with growing alarm. My great-grandmother was expelled from legitimate spiritualist circles for practicing what they called transit work, attempting to create pathways for spirits to inhabit new vessels, he explained. These objects were designed for a forbidden ritual known as the transference. The photograph served as a template, the gifts as anchors, and the empty chairs as invitations. He pointed to nearly invisible markings around the Winthrop photograph's border, symbols that appear faintly luminescent under ultraviolet light. The ritual requires 5 elements: an image capturing the intended vessels, personal effects of the departed, something taken from the new vessels, participation of blood relatives, and an aperture moment, when the boundaries between worlds are thinnest. Christmas Eve, Sophia whispered, when children everywhere wait for a magical visitor who enters homes in darkness. Elias nodded grimly. But the ritual has a critical rule. The vessels must be willingly offered. If they are taken by force or deception, he trailed off, examining the toys again. These were stolen from children who never consented to become vessels. Such a violation creates not a doorway, but a tier, one that never fully closes. The implications are horrifying. Margaret Winthrop didn't bring her children back. She created trapped entities, neither fully her children nor fully the children whose lives were sacrificed, suspended in a state of perpetual, tortured liminality. This morning I received an urgent call from the university's storage facility. The temperature in the secured room had plummeted to freezing despite functioning climate controls. On the container holding the photograph, frost had formed in the unmistakable pattern of childish handwriting. Finish it. Elias believes the Winthrops' interrupted ritual has remained active for over a century, the entities growing stronger with each person who studies or handles the connected objects. We have inadvertently fed this process through our research. There's only one way to end this, he said. The ritual must be completed properly or reversed entirely. Half finished, it leaves souls in torment, unable to fully return, unable to depart. Tonight, Sophia, Professor Montgomery, Elias, and I will gather at the site where the Winthrop home once stood. We bring with us the photograph, the ritual objects, and Elias's carefully reconstructed counter-ritual. I leave this record should we fail. Some doors, once opened, resist being closed. Some frames capture more than moments. They imprison souls. The ritual failed. We gathered beneath a waning moon on the frost-covered foundation stones of the Winthrop home, now nothing more than a rectangular depression in an overgrown lot. Sophia brought white candles. Montgomery supplied the historical authenticity. Elias directed our movements with the gravity of one who understands the consequences of failure. The tier must be mended from both sides, he explained as we formed a circle around the photograph and opened gifts. We offer peace rather than vessels. For 3 hours we worked through Elias's counter-ritual. The winter air remained unnaturally still around us, no wind disturbing the candle flames that burned too steadily, too brightly. I found myself staring at the photograph as Elias recited words in languages long forgotten by modern scholars, watching as the shadowy figures in the image seemed to pulse with each syllable. At exactly 3:17, every candle extinguished simultaneously. The photograph began to emit a low, pulsing glow that cast our shadows long against the bare trees surrounding the property. For a moment, hope sparked. The figures in the photograph appeared to be fading, dissolving into the paper itself. Then Sophia screamed. Standing at the edge of our circle were 2 small figures, a boy and girl holding hands, their features obscured in shadow despite the photograph's unnatural light. They weren't approaching, merely waiting. It's working, Elias whispered. They're manifesting to depart. But something was wrong. Behind them more shadows gathered, adult forms, indistinct yet somehow familiar. I realized with mounting horror that every person who had ever studied the photograph, handled the ritual objects, or investigated the Winthrop's story was now represented in those gathering shadows. They never wanted release, Professor Montgomery gasped, her academic detachment finally shattering. They wanted company. The ritual hadn't failed. It had succeeded on terms we hadn't understood. We hadn't come to close a door, but to witness its widening. I grabbed the photograph, desperate to destroy what we had enhanced through our attention. The moment my fingers touched its surface, a sensation like electrical current shot through my body. For one terrible instant, I saw through different eyes, looking out from within the photograph at our frightened faces, feeling a century of patient waiting finally rewarded. What happened next remains fragmented in my memory. Sophia collapsed. Montgomery tried to pull me away from the photograph, which now adhered to my hands like living tissue. Elias shouted words that seemed to distort before reaching my ears. I awoke in the University Medical Center 3 days later. The photograph was gone, presumably destroyed in what authorities recorded as an unexplained localized weather event at the site. Sophia remains under psychiatric observation, speaking only to ask about the children. Montgomery has taken abrupt sabbatical leave. Elias Wolcott refuses all contact. Yet something fundamental has changed. Mirrors show me a quarter-second delay in my movements. My shadow sometimes stretches in impossible directions. And at night I hear a child's whisper just before sleep claims me. Thank you for finishing our story. Now we can begin yours. I've stopped my research completely. Some frames are better left in darkness, some histories better left unexamined, but I fear it's too late for those of us who look too deeply. We didn't release the trapped souls. We joined them. The small New England town of Harlow's Hollow has begun to change since our failed ritual. At first, the alterations were subtle. Street signs that seemed to shift orientation overnight. Buildings that appeared slightly different in morning light than they had the evening before. Now the transformations have grown more pronounced. Yesterday I visited the town archives, searching for information on previous owners of the Winthrop property. The elderly archivist, Mrs. Pembroke, greeted me with unexpected familiarity. "You've returned," she said, though I'd never met her before. "The children said you would." When pressed, she appeared momentarily confused, then showed me to a section of records I hadn't requested. Property deeds from 1873, when a certain Thaddeus Wolcott sold the parcel to Henry Winthrop. The connection to Madame Sylvia Wolcott cannot be coincidence. More disturbing was my discovery of a town census from 1900. The Winthrop household is listed with 8 occupants, 2 years after Thomas and Elizabeth had died. Their names appear, recorded in different handwriting than the rest of the document, as though added later, or perhaps earlier. Time seems increasingly fluid here. Walking past the elementary school, I observed children at recess playing a game I didn't recognize, standing in a circle, passing an invisible object between them while singing a rhyme about borrowed faces and borrowed places. When the teacher called them inside, 2 remained behind momentarily, watching me with unsettling intensity before vanishing around the building's corner. The local newspaper has begun printing stories that never happened alongside legitimate news. Yesterday's edition featured an article about the upcoming Christmas pageant, alongside a story about local children reunited with family after long absence. The photograph accompanying the second story was disturbingly familiar, the Winthrop family portrait, though slightly altered. All 8 figures were now clearly visible. My hotel room grows colder each night despite the heating system running constantly. The mirror in the bathroom has begun showing reflections that linger after I've left its view. Last night, I woke to find my recorder had activated itself, capturing 3 hours of what sounds like children reciting multiplication tables in perfect unison, though I'd heard nothing while sleeping. Most concerning are the changes to my research notes. Passages I never wrote appear between my own observations. Detailed accounts of the Winthrops' daily life written from an insider's perspective. The handwriting matches my own, yet uses phrasings and terms I would never employ. My most recent journal entry ended with my own familiar signature, followed by 2 childish scrawls, Thomas and Elizabeth. The boundaries between researcher and subject have collapsed entirely. I'm no longer documenting their story. They are documenting mine. Each night the children appear in my dreams, always asking the same question: when can we come home with you? I've booked a train ticket back to the university for tomorrow morning. Whether I'll actually depart remains uncertain. Sophia called from the psychiatric facility tonight, her voice eerily calm. "Don't you understand yet? There's no leaving Harlow's Hollow. Not really. Once you've seen through the frame, you become part of it. Forever." The photograph has begun to develop its own history. I've traced the provenance from the Winthrops through 17 different owners, including 3 photography collectors who committed suicide, a paranormal researcher who disappeared in 1927, and a museum curator who claimed the subjects in the image would change positions when stored in darkness. Each owner documented similar experiences: children's laughter in empty rooms, objects rearranged overnight, and reflective surfaces that showed more figures than were present. Yet the photograph continued changing hands, drawing new researchers into its influence despite well-documented warnings. Yesterday, I sought out the only living person who might understand what we've awakened. Madame Wolcott's great-granddaughter Geneva lives in a remote cabin outside Harlow's Hollow. Despite never announcing my visit, she greeted me at her door with tea already prepared. "You brought them with you," she said, not looking directly at me but at the space around my shoulders. "They've begun the transference. It's further along than I expected." She explained what Elias either didn't know or wouldn't tell us, that the ritual was never meant to bring the children back, but to create vessels for something else entirely. The Winthrop children were merely convenient identities for entities that had long sought entry to our world. "What my great-grandmother offered wasn't resurrection but replacement," Geneva said, showing me a leather-bound book of ritual instructions. The Aperture Protocol doesn't restore what was lost. It creates a doorway through grief that allows substitution. The ritual book contained drawings that matched the symbols around the photograph's border. More disturbing were the annotations in Margaret Winthrop's handwriting. The children returned are not as they were. Something watches from behind their eyes. Geneva believes our failed counter-ritual accelerated the process, providing the entities with additional anchors. Ourselves. "Look at your hands," she instructed. I held them before me, seeing nothing unusual until she placed a small antique mirror beneath them. In the reflection, my hands appeared smaller, paler. A child's hand superimposed over my own, like a double exposure. "You're being overwritten," she whispered. The photograph wasn't just a documentary tool. It was a template for replacement. Each person who studies it provides another potential vessel. Before I left, Geneva pressed something into my palm, a small silver bell of unusual design. "When the merging progresses too far, ring this. It won't stop what's happening, but it will call those who might help." She wouldn't elaborate further, but as I departed, she called after me. "The Winthrops weren't the first family they visited, and you won't be the last they claim." Walking back through town, I noticed for the first time that many local shopkeepers bear striking resemblances to figures from past research into the photograph. Faces similar to previous owners, investigators, and scholars who had studied it over the decades. Perhaps they never truly left Harlow's Hollow either. The silver bell weighs heavily in my pocket. Its surface is etched with familiar symbols, identical to those bordering the Winthrop photograph. I wonder who will answer when desperation finally forces me to ring it. I wake to find notes written in childlike handwriting scattered across my hotel room floor, none of which I remember writing. "We're almost ready," reads one. "Soon we'll be together forever," declares another. Most disturbing is the drawing, a crude rendering of what appears to be myself standing between two small figures, all three of us holding hands, our faces rendered as nothing but empty circles. Last night, I examined the silver bell under magnification. The engravings aren't merely decorative, but form a complete circuit around its surface, an unbroken sentence in a language I initially couldn't identify. After hours of research, I discovered it's an obscure dialect from a nearly extinct New England religious sect that predates even the spiritualist movement. Roughly translated, "Those who summon may also dismiss." Geneva Woolcott isn't answering her phone. When I drove to her cabin this morning, I found it abandoned. Teacups still on the table, fire still smoldering in her hearth, but no sign of her presence. Most alarming was what I discovered in her ritual book, left open on her desk. A page describing how the Aperture Protocol doesn't merely create vessels for displaced entities. It gradually transforms an entire community into what the text calls a halfway realm. The town continues its subtle metamorphosis. Store facades now feature architectural elements that historical records confirm were common in 1898, but had been modified decades ago. Residents speak using phrases and cadences from another era, seemingly unaware of the anachronisms in their speech. I called Professor Montgomery at the number she provided before disappearing on sabbatical. The call connected, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. A child, a young girl, whispered, "She can't come to the phone right now. She's helping us prepare for your arrival." The local library yielded one final revelation. In a bound collection of town records, I discovered that Harlow's Hollow experienced a peculiar phenomenon every 7 years since 1898. For 1 week, exactly 128 days after Christmas, multiple residents report seeing their deceased loved ones throughout town. These sightings are dismissed as mass hysteria or spring fever by outside authorities, but locals have come to expect them. Today marks exactly 128 days since Christmas. The silver bell grows warmer in my pocket with each passing hour. I've noticed my reflection sometimes acts with slight independence, reaching for objects microseconds before I do, smiling when my own expression remains neutral. This morning my pajamas were too short, as though my body had elongated overnight. When measured, I was indeed 3 inches taller than yesterday, my proportions subtly altered. The entities aren't replacing me. They're transforming me into something that can exist in their realm. This afternoon, I received a text from Sophia's phone. "We're waiting for you at the Winthrops. Everyone is here." Attached was a photograph of the old house foundation. Except the image showed not ruins, but a fully intact Victorian home. Lights glowing warmly in every window. 8 figures visible through the parlor curtains. The silver bell pulses against my leg like a second heartbeat as I walk toward what was once the Winthrop house. drawn by a compulsion I can no longer resist. As twilight settles over Harlow's Hollow, the silver bell has grown almost unbearably hot in my pocket, vibrating with increasing urgency as I approach the Winthrop property. What should be an empty lot with crumbling foundation stones now appears to shimmer between two realities. One moment, a derelict patch of overgrown weeds. The next, a fully manifested Victorian home with light spilling from every window. The transformation completes itself as I step onto the property line. Gas lamps flicker to life along a walkway that wasn't there seconds ago. The house stands fully materialized, its gingerbread trim and widow's walk exactly matching the background of the Christmas photograph. Smoke curls from the chimney despite the warm spring evening, and from within I hear the unmistakable notes of a piano playing what sounds like a Christmas carol. My body feels increasingly foreign as I approach the front door. My gait has altered, steps shorter and slightly unsteady. When I glance at my hands, the skin appears younger, almost translucent in the strange gaslight. My wedding ring, worn faithfully for 12 years, slides from my finger and lands with a soft ping on the newly manifested porch steps. The door swings open before I can knock. Professor Montgomery stands in the entryway, dressed in a high-necked Victorian gown that might have come directly from Margaret Winthrop's wardrobe. Her face bears the serene smile of someone who has surrendered completely to inevitability. "We've been expecting you," she says, but the voice isn't entirely hers. It carries harmonics of something younger, something other. The family is gathered in the parlor. Behind her I glimpse Sophia and Elias, seated in period-appropriate attire. Their postures are unnaturally stiff, their movements slightly disjointed, like marionettes guided by inexperienced hands. Geneva Wolcott sits in a corner, her expression blank, hands folded primly in her lap. And there, arranged before a fully decorated Christmas tree, are two empty chairs. "The photograph needs completing," Montgomery says, gesturing toward an antique camera positioned on a tripod. "The family portrait must include all 8 of us." I recognize it immediately. Jeremiah Stone's original camera, believed lost for over a century. Its brass fittings gleam as though newly polished, the glass plate already loaded. My hand moves involuntarily toward the silver bell, which now burns through my pocket fabric. The moment my fingers touch its surface, all movement in the room ceases. The piano falls silent. Montgomery's smile freezes unnaturally. 2 small figures step from behind the Christmas tree, Thomas and Elizabeth, or whatever wears their forms. Their faces are perfect reproductions of the children in the photograph, yet somehow wrong. Expressions too knowing, eyes too ancient for their youthful features. "You brought the summoner," the boy says, his voice echoing as though speaking from inside a well. "How thoughtful. We've wanted that bell for so very long." The girl reaches toward me, her fingers elongated, slightly translucent. "With it, we can call the others. So many others waiting beyond the veil." The bell vibrates with such intensity it seems to sing without being rung, its engraved symbols glowing with an inner light that casts no shadows. In this moment of perfect liminality, not fully in either realm, I understand with terrible clarity. The bell wasn't a defense against what was happening. It was always the final component they needed. The bell grows silent in my grasp, its sudden weightlessness more terrifying than its previous burning heat. The children, or entities wearing their forms, watch me with widening smiles that stretch beyond natural limits. Their eyes reflect nothing, black pools absorbing all available light. The summoner has always been the final piece. The girl thing that isn't Elizabeth says, her voice simultaneously childlike and ancient. Not the photograph, not the ritual objects, but the bell that bridges realms. The Victorian parlor flickers like a faltering projection, momentarily revealing the true abandoned foundation underneath before solidifying again with greater permanence. With each flicker, the inhabitants, Montgomery, Sophia, Elias, Geneva, appear less human, their features blurring into approximations of people rather than the genuine article. For over a century, we've waited for someone to bring all elements together, the boy thing continues. The Winthrops began what they couldn't complete. The photographer understood too late. Each researcher, each collector, each curious soul added another thread to our tapestry. I try to release the bell but find my fingers fused to its silver surface. The metal begins to liquefy, flowing up my wrist like quicksilver, cool and burning simultaneously. Where it touches, my skin becomes translucent, revealing not blood vessels and bone, but twinkling lights like distant stars. "What are you?" I manage to whisper. The children exchange glances, a silent communication passing between them before the girl responds. We are the previously arranged, those promised bodies but never given them, those glimpsed behind veils and through frames, the almost summoned. Outside, Harlow's Hollow undergoes its final transformation. Through the windows I watch as modern structures dissolve like fog before sunlight, replaced by their Victorian predecessors. Street lamps flicker from electric to gas. Automobiles shimmer and reshape into horse-drawn carriages. The sky itself changes color, taking on a perpetual twilight hue that suggests neither day nor night, but something in between. You misunderstand our purpose, the boy says, noting my horror. We don't seek destruction, but transformation. A place where those departed needn't fully depart, where grief creates doorways rather than endings. The silver continues its progress up my arm, my entire body growing lighter, more diaphanous. I can see through my own chest now, the solidity of human flesh giving way to something permeable. The town has always belonged to us, the girl adds. We merely reclaim what was promised. Every 7 years, the veil thins enough for temporary visitation. But with the bell and the photograph united at last, the transition becomes permanent. The camera's flashbulb begins to charge, emitting a high-pitched whine. The assembled people arrange themselves before the Christmas tree, their movements now unmistakably puppet-like. 2 empty chairs wait, not for Thomas and Elizabeth, but for me, and for whatever remains of my humanity after the silver completes its work. The bell in my hand finally dissolves completely, leaving behind a perfect silvery impression of itself embedded in my palm. A doorway in miniature, through which I can now see countless eyes watching, waiting, hungry for invitation. The camera's flash explodes not with light, but with a cold, inverse brightness that seems to pull all illumination from the room. In that moment of anti-light, I feel myself bifurcate, part of me solidifying into the chair while another part observes from somewhere outside my body. The silver impression on my palm burns with freezing fire, spreading elegant fractals across my skin like living mercury. The aperture is complete, announces a new voice. Standing in the doorway is Jeremiah Stone himself, or whatever wears his form, dressed in the formal photographer's attire of 1898, yet somehow both ancient and ageless. His eyes hold the same depthless quality as the children's. You've done well, bringing the elements together, he says, approaching the camera with reverent hands. Few understand that a photograph doesn't capture a moment. It creates a permanent now, an eternal present that never concludes. Through my increasingly translucent flesh, I see Harlow's Hollow continuing its transformation. But now I notice something Stone's arrival has made visible. Beyond the town's borders, reality simply ends, replaced by swirling fog and fragmentary landscapes, as though the world itself were an unfinished painting. The between place has always existed, Stone explains, noticing my gaze. A realm where memories remain substantial, where grief creates rather than destroys. The Winthrops merely found a way to anchor it to your world. The children approach, each taking one of my silvered hands. Their touch sends cascading images through my consciousness. Countless faces of those who've studied the photograph, generations of researchers and collectors, all now inhabitants of this twilight version of Harlow's Hollow. I recognize them from historical records, from academic papers, from obituaries following mysterious circumstances. You misunderstand our nature, the girl thing whispers. We don't replace, we preserve. Everything lost can be found here, kept in perpetual Christmas Eve expectation. With horrifying clarity, I understand the photograph's true purpose. Not documentation, not summoning, but construction. Building this halfway world brick by brick, soul by soul, through each person who gave it their attention across the decades. The missing children from neighboring towns, I managed to ask. The ones who disappeared after the Winthrops began their ritual? Stone smiles, adjusting his camera. Building a world requires architects and materials. Margaret understood the necessary sacrifices. The room shivers as something vast shifts beyond perception. Through the windows, I glimpse other buildings materializing on the town's outskirts. Structures that never existed in historical Harlow's Hollow. Architectural impossibilities with geometries that hurt to observe. We're almost ready for the grand opening, Stone says, gesturing toward the expanding horizon. Once the bell is fully integrated, the boundaries become permanently permeable. Anyone who has ever lost someone can visit Harlow's Hollow and find what grief has taken from them. He positions himself behind the camera, hand poised on the shutter release. Now smile for posterity. After all, You'll be in this Christmas portrait for a very, very long time. The silver from the bell has completed its integration with my body, transforming me into something neither fully human nor entirely other. I exist now as both observer and participant in this impossible photograph, this eternal Christmas Eve that stretches across Harlow's Hollow like an ever-expanding canvas. Stone's camera has captured us all, freezing us in a moment that refuses to end. Yet within this stasis, movement remains possible. The townspeople, those collected over decades of research into the photograph, go about their Victorian routines, enacting rituals of normalcy despite their nature as composite beings, part memory and part something else entirely. From my new perspective, I can see the boundaries of our domain, translucent walls where reality thins to mere suggestion. Beyond them lies neither our world nor any recognizable dimension, but a shadowy expanse that pulses with waiting entities. The children call it the gallery, where the unclaimed and unremembered press against the veil, watching our eternal Christmas with hungry eyes. You'll adjust, Professor Montgomery assures me as we walk Harlow's Hollow's newly manifested streets. Her movements have grown more natural as she settles into her role, though occasionally her form still stutters like a damaged film reel. I resisted at first, too, but consider what we've gained, a world where nothing truly ends. Each house we pass contains tableau of preserved moments, families forever unwrapping presents, carolers eternally mid-verse, children perpetually anticipating Santa's arrival. Through windows, I glimpse familiar faces from my research, colleagues, predecessors, all who touched the photograph's mystery, now inhabitants of its reality. Most disturbing are the houses still under construction at the town's edges, frameworks appearing from nothing, awaiting new arrivals, future researchers who will inevitably be drawn to investigate our disappearances. We're expanding, explains Elias, who tends these unfinished structures. Each inquiry into our fate creates new potential for growth. Your colleagues are already asking questions, following your trail of breadcrumbs. The silver in my veins allows me to perceive the tethers, gossamer threads stretching from our realm into the world I once inhabited, connecting to those who think of us, research us, wonder about us. Each thought strengthens the connection. Each investigation pulls them closer. Geneva Woolcott alone seems unchanged by our transformation. She tends a small garden behind what was once her cabin, growing plants I recognize from 19th century spell books. The aperture works both ways, she tells me when I ask how she maintains her humanity. What allows them in also offers a path out, for those who understand the nature of frames. She presses something into my palm, a photograph I instantly recognize as my own wedding picture, somehow brought into this realm. Memories are anchors. Keep yours close. When the time comes, you'll need to decide which reality claims your allegiance. As twilight falls, as it always does, never quite yielding to true night, the children gather in the town square. Their song rises sweet and terrible, calling to those beyond the borders. New lights appear on the horizon as fresh construction begins. The bell embedded in my palm tingles in response, recognizing its purpose, not merely to summon, but eventually to announce a grand opening when the boundaries between realms dissolve completely. The silver embedded in my palm has begun forming patterns that match the symbols bordering the Winthrop photograph. When moonlight strikes these markings, they project ghostly images onto nearby surfaces, glimpses of other places where similar rituals were performed across centuries. I've discovered we aren't the first between place to be created. Last night, while the town slept its facsimile of slumber, I found Margaret Winthrop's actual diary hidden beneath a floorboard in what was once her bedroom. Not the excerpts selectively shared with researchers over decades, but her complete account. The truth was more calculated than tragic. Madame Woolcott has confirmed what I long suspected, she wrote. The aperture protocol wasn't discovered in 1898. It was merely rediscovered. The original ritual dates to the founding of Harlow's Hollow in 1681, when the first settlers faced a devastating winter. The town was never normal. It was built to be a doorway. Margaret's entries reveal that the Winthrops were designated caretakers, part of a lineage extending back to the town's creation. Their children hadn't died accidentally. They were intentional sacrifices, their scarlet fever a manufactured illness designed to create the necessary grief to power the ritual. The protocol requires genuine emotion, she wrote, but not for the reasons the uninitiated believe. Grief doesn't summon the departed. It weakens reality itself, creating permeable boundaries. The children were always meant to be architects, not residents. Most disturbing was her final entry, dated not 1899 as historians recorded, but 1923, decades after her supposed death. The collection proceeds as planned. Each researcher who investigates adds another memory to our architecture. The camera continues its work, expanding our domain one curious soul at a time. This morning, I confronted Jeremiah Stone as he adjusted his eternal camera in the town square. Unlike the others, he made no pretense of humanity when we were alone. "You've found Margaret's account," he said. Not a question, but a statement. "Then you understand your true purpose here. Not victim, custodian." He guided me to the bell tower overlooking the town, where an enormous silver bell, identical to the miniature version now embedded in my flesh, hangs silently. "Every 7 years we could only bring visitors for a brief time," he explained. "But with your arrival, carrying the summoner's seed, the final cycle begins. When this bell rings, it will harmonize with the one inside you. The gallery opens permanently. The waiting enter. From this vantage point, I could see the true scope of Harlow's Hollow. Not merely a town, but a vast, elaborate trap. Each building, each street, each recreated memory forms an intricate pattern, visible only from above, a perfect reproduction of the symbols etched into the bell. "Who are they?" I asked, indicating the shadow entities pressing against the boundaries. "What comes through when the gallery opens?" Stone's expression shifted, revealing something ancient behind his human mask. "Not who," he corrected gently. "What? They've waited since before your kind learned to speak. We've prepared their welcome for centuries, one photograph, one researcher, one curious mind at a time." The great bell began to swing silently, preparing for its first peal in over 100 years. The great bell's first note reverberates through Harlow's Hollow, not as sound, but as physical sensation, a deep vibration that resonates with the silver embedded in my palm. The town shimmers like heat rising from summer pavement as reality grows increasingly malleable. Geneva's garden plants twist toward the bell tower, their blooms opening to reveal tiny human faces that whisper warnings in forgotten languages. My wedding photograph burns in my pocket. As I retrieve it, the image has changed. My spouse now stands alone, hand extended toward an empty space where I once appeared. This absence feels more real than anything in this fabricated world. "The convergence has begun," Stone announces, his voice no longer attempting human cadence. 17 decades of preparation reach culmination. Through cracks in the facade of Harlow's Hollow, I glimpse what truly waits beyond. Not lost loved ones seeking reunion, but ancient entities of impossible geometry. They've worn the masks of departed children, borrowed the voices of missed parents, adopted the forms of longed-for spouses, all to make us welcome their invasion through doors of our own grief-stricken creation. Margaret Winthrop appears beside Stone, her form shifting between elderly woman, young mother, and something else entirely, her role as architect now undisguised. "Each inquiry strengthened us," she explains. "Every researcher who questioned the photograph, every medium who attempted contact, every historian who sought answers, all provided new material. Even skeptics served our purpose. Disbelief is merely another form of attention." The townspeople gather in the square below, their movements synchronized as the silver bell continues its silent tolling. Each peal reveals more of their true nature, composite beings built from collected grief across generations. Geneva approaches, carrying a leather-bound book. "The counterweight," she whispers, pressing it into my hands. "Every ritual has balance. What opens may also close." Inside are photographs, thousands of them. Not portraits or landscapes, but images of doorways, windows, and thresholds from across centuries. Each bears the signature of a different photographer, yet all contain the same barely visible symbols etched into their borders. Jeremiah Stone was merely one name among many, Geneva explains. The photographer has worn countless identities while collecting moments of potential transition. Understanding crystallizes with terrible clarity. The Winthrop Christmas photograph wasn't unique. It was simply the most successful implementation of a ritual repeated throughout history. Failed attempts created small, temporary apertures. Ours has achieved what generations of architects could only dream of, a permanent doorway. As the final bell tone fades, the between place achieves solidity. The boundaries between Harlow's Hollow and reality harden not into walls but into frameworks. Doorways and windows looking onto familiar locations worldwide. Christmas displays in department stores. Family holiday gatherings. Anywhere grief and expectation intersect. The waiting entities begin their approach, wearing borrowed faces that trigger recognition despite their wrongness. They're coming through every frame, using our memories as bridges. Geneva presses my wedding photograph back into my hand. "Choose your anchor," she whispers. When frames converge, allegiance determines trajectory. The silver in my veins pulses in counterpoint to my human heartbeat as I stand between worlds, holding a photograph of what was against a horizon of what should never be. The final bell tone fades as I stand at the convergence point, where the silver in my veins harmonizes perfectly with the great bell's resonance. In this moment of perfect liminality, I understand what we truly excavated with our research. Not history, but prophecy. The symbols on the bell, the patterns in my palm, the arrangement of the town itself, all form a language older than humanity, designed not to summon the departed, but to translate the living into something the waiting entities can inhabit. The Christmas photograph was merely one frame among countless others, a single facet of a vast, patient trap built across centuries. As the entities begin pushing through, I press my silver-embedded palm against my wedding photograph. The two patterns, one of ancient symbols, one of personal memory, create an unexpected interference pattern. Where they touch, reality fractures differently, neither fully yielding to the gallery nor remaining in established order. "You're fighting the inevitable," Stone warns, his form now barely maintaining human semblance. The doors are opening everywhere. Christmas displays, family portraits, memorial photographs, anywhere grief and remembrance intersect. Yet the counterweight Geneva provided reveals the architect's single miscalculation. While they meticulously collected grief to build their doorways, they never accounted for its opposite, the anchoring power of genuine connection. My wedding photograph burns with increasing intensity, not destructive fire, but restorative light. Each memory it contains pushes back against the silvery infection in my veins. The face of my spouse, now looking directly at me through the photograph, becomes a beacon cutting through the manufactured reality of Harlow's Hollow. The protocol has a fundamental flaw, I realize aloud. It requires its subjects to surrender their anchors voluntarily, to choose the false promise over genuine memory. Margaret Winthrop's carefully constructed facade cracks, revealing the ancient hunger beneath. You cannot escape. The gallery opens. The collection is complete. But her certainty falters as other photographs throughout the town begin to glow. Images carried by Montgomery, Sophia, even Elias. Personal anchors they kept hidden. Photographs containing genuine connections rather than manufactured narratives. What opens may also close, Geneva intones, her garden plants now forming a protective circle around us, their tiny face blossoms singing in counterpoint to the bell's rhythm. The silver in my palm begins to flow outward instead of inward, drawn toward the bell tower as the pattern reverses itself. Throughout Harlow's Hollow, the collected researchers' authentic memories assert themselves against the artificial reality, creating a cascading rejection of the manufactured world. "You've merely postponed the inevitable," Stone hisses, his form dissolving as the silver returns to its source. "The doors will open again. They always do. Whenever someone studies too deeply, whenever someone refuses to release their grief, whenever someone believes a photograph captures more than light." As Harlow's Hollow begins folding in upon itself like a collapsing house of cards, I clutch my wedding photograph, my way home across a chasm of impossibility, and make one final choice about which reality claims my allegiance. The silver recedes into the bell as Harlow's Hollow collapses around us, its constructed reality folding like origami into increasingly impossible geometries. In these final moments of dissolution, Stone's human mask falls completely away, revealing not a monster, but something far more terrifying, a perfect mirror of myself. "We are the same, you and I," speaks my reflection from his dissolving form. Another researcher who looked too deeply, another collector who couldn't let go, another photographer who believed frames could preserve what time insists on taking. The truth crashes through my consciousness with devastating clarity. Stone wasn't some ancient entity or Victorian conspirator. He was simply the previous custodian, a researcher like myself who had investigated the Winthrop photograph decades before. becoming trapped within its recursion. How many cycles? I manage to ask as the town folds further inward. Countless, he answers, his voice simultaneously mine and not mine. Each time, a new investigator discovers the photograph. Each time, they follow the breadcrumbs we leave. Each time, they assume they're the first to uncover its secrets. The Winthrop photograph wasn't documenting a Christmas past. It was predicting a Christmas future, captured before it happened. A prophecy disguised as history, drawing in those who study it to ensure its own fulfillment. Geneva approaches, her form now revealed as the only constant across all iterations. The aperture protocol isn't about opening doors for others, she explains. It's about keeping them closed for you. With shocking clarity, I understand the photograph's true purpose. Not a doorway for ancient entities, but a quarantine. The empty chairs, the spectral figures, the expanding collection of researchers, all contained within the frame to prevent something worse from escaping. Your grief wasn't random, Geneva continues. It was cultivated. Everyone who finds the photograph has experienced profound loss, making them susceptible to its promise of preservation. As if in confirmation, memories surge unbidden. My own child, lost years before my wedding. The absence I've spent years researching ways to fill. The emptiness that drove me toward spiritualism, toward photography, toward the Winthrop case. We're not collecting souls, Stone says, his form nearly gone. We're collecting grief before it tears reality apart. Each researcher who fixates on death creates their own aperture. The photograph simply gives that dangerous obsession somewhere contained to exist. The silver bell shimmers once more, revealing its true inscription. To preserve the many, we collect the few. My wedding photograph, my anchor to reality, begins to fade as comprehension dawns. I wasn't investigating the Winthrop case. I was always part of it. The researcher becomes the researched. The observer becomes the observed, in an eternal cycle of containment. As Harlow's Hollow completes its collapse, I find myself standing in an empty lot, holding not a photograph but a camera. Beside me, 2 empty chairs await their subjects. Across the street, a family moves into the old Winthrop house, their curious child already watching me from an upstairs window. The cycle begins again. I stand paralyzed in the revelation of my role, not victim but custodian, not discoverer but component. The camera in my hands feels unnaturally heavy, its brass fittings gleaming with expectant purpose. My fingers trace patterns along its casing identical to the silver pathways that had momentarily transformed my flesh. The curious child watches from the Winthrop house window, hands pressed against the glass. When our eyes meet, something ancient and knowing flashes across their innocent face. Recognition without introduction. My phone buzzes with messages from the university, concerned colleagues wondering about my extended absence, updates on the mysterious disappearances of Montgomery, Sophia, and Elias. According to timestamps, I've been gone only 3 days, though I lived what felt like weeks in the between place. The academic in me wants to document everything, to warn others about the photograph's true nature, but as I attempt to write my findings, my hands refuse to cooperate. The words rearrange themselves on the page, transforming my warnings into enticing breadcrumbs, the very trail that will lead the next researcher into the cycle. At home, I discover subtle wrongness everywhere. My wedding photograph now shows my spouse's hand reaching toward an empty space where I should be. Family albums contain pictures with chairs seemingly positioned for people who aren't there. My reflection sometimes hesitates before following my movements, as though deciding whether to obey. I lock the camera in a safe deposit box at the bank, but every morning it reappears on my desk, lens aimed toward the 2 empty chairs that have somehow found their way into my living room. No matter how many times I discard them, they return, patient, waiting. Geneva's words haunt me. The aperture protocol isn't about opening doors for others. It's about keeping them closed for you. I understand now that my grief created its own dangerous doorway. The photograph merely provided containment for something that might otherwise have torn reality apart. I receive an envelope without a return address. Inside is a formal invitation to photograph the new family for their Christmas portrait. The date specified is exactly 49 days from today. 7 weeks, the completion of a cycle. My research notes have transformed themselves into a leather-bound journal identical to Margaret Winthrop's. Each day, new entries appear in my handwriting, though I have no memory of writing them. Instructions for positioning subjects, mixing emulsions, preparing the aperture. Most disturbing are the dreams where I am Jeremiah Stone, then Henry Winthrop, then countless other custodians throughout history. Each believed themselves the investigator. Each discovered they were merely the next in line. Each ultimately accepted their role in maintaining the quarantine. The child from the Winthrop house leaves small gifts on my doorstep. Handmade Christmas ornaments in July, drawings of family gatherings with empty chairs positioned just so, a small silver bell that chimes in perfect resonance with the camera's mechanical shutter. I understand the terrible responsibility before me. Some grief is too dangerous to exist without containment. Some doors, once opened, require eternal guardians to prevent what waits behind them from escaping into the world. The empty chairs wait. The camera prepares. In 49 days, I will take my place in the cycle, preserving much by sacrificing few, including myself. The photograph has returned. After 8 months of containing my discoveries within the cycle, I found it this morning beneath my pillow. The Winthrop family Christmas portrait, fully restored. The two formerly empty chairs now clearly show Thomas and Elizabeth, their features perfectly rendered, yet somehow carrying subtle traces of my own. My resignation from the university raised few questions. Colleagues assumed grief had finally overwhelmed my academic rigor, a convenient explanation I neither confirmed nor denied. The Winthrop case file was officially archived, marked inconclusive, and stored in the special collections where it awaits the next researcher whose personal loss makes them susceptible to its lure. The family in the Winthrop house completed their Christmas portrait session as scheduled. I positioned them carefully, arranged their chairs with practiced precision, and captured their image with the ancient camera that had become an extension of myself. When the flash illuminated their faces, I glimpsed, for just a moment, every previous iteration of this eternal Christmas Eve, stretching backward and forward through time simultaneously. Geneva visits occasionally, though I now understand she's never truly separated from any version of Harlow's Hollow. Her role as guardian extends beyond any single manifestation of the cycle. "You've adapted better than most," she remarked yesterday, examining the photograph that now hangs prominently in my study. "Some fight until the very end." "I understand the necessity," I replied, noticing how the silver traces beneath my skin flare subtly when near the photograph. Some grief creates its own gravity. Without containment, it would collapse reality around itself. The bell remained silent on my mantelpiece, neither summoning nor dismissing, merely maintaining the delicate equilibrium between worlds. The doors remain closed, not through force, but through eternal vigilance. Custodians like myself who redirect dangerous obsession into controlled apertures. My wedding photograph has stabilized, showing both my spouse and myself once again, though now a subtle shadow stands behind us. An acknowledgement of the child whose absence set me on this path. Not a haunting, but a remembrance contained safely within the frame. Tomorrow I'll guide another grief-stricken researcher toward the Winthrop case. A subtle reference during a lecture, a misplaced note in an archive, perhaps a chance encounter in the special collections. The breadcrumbs are already arranging themselves, the path becoming clear for someone whose personal loss has created a dangerous thinning in reality's fabric. The cycle continues not because we cannot break it, but because we must not. Some doors need guarding from both sides. As winter approaches, I've begun preparations for Christmas. 2 small chairs sit before my tree, precisely positioned. The camera waits nearby, lens cap removed. The photograph on my wall sometimes shows different arrangements of the Winthrop family when viewed from the corner of my eye, but always returns to its original composition when directly observed. We are all both observer and observed, both photographer and subject. The frame doesn't just capture light, it captures attention, the most powerful force connecting all iterations of existence. And in that eternal Christmas Eve, preserved within silver and glass and memory, we remain vigilant. The silver traces beneath my skin have begun forming a complete circuit, connecting my heart to my mind, my past to my present. In the mirror, my reflection sometimes shows me as I truly am, while other times revealing the amalgam I've become, part researcher, part custodian, part something that exists to maintain balance between grief and doorways. Last night, I received an unexpected visitor. A young woman with familiar eyes stood on my doorstep clutching a newspaper clipping about the disappearances of Professor Montgomery, Sophia Winthrop, and Elias Wolcott. "I'm Eliza Wolcott," she introduced herself. Elias was my uncle. I recognized her immediately. Not from photographs or family resemblance, but from the subtle silver tracing just visible at her wrists, identical to my own. Another custodian from another cycle, though she didn't yet realize what she was becoming. "You're the last one who saw them," she said, following me into my study where the Winthrop photograph hung in its place of honor. "I need to know what happened." Her eyes kept drifting toward the photograph, drawn by something beyond conscious perception. I recognized the particular quality of her attention, the same desperate focus that had led me down this path, the pull of unresolved grief creating its own dangerous gravity. "Who did you lose?" I asked gently. The question startled her. "My daughter," she whispered after a long silence. 3 years ago, Christmas Eve, of course. The cycle always selects those with compatible grief, those whose personal apertures align with the established pathways. I could see the path diverging before us. I could lead her into the cycle as I was meant to do, placing new breadcrumbs for her to follow, allowing her grief to be contained within the eternal Christmas portrait. Or I could attempt something no previous custodian had dared, tell her the complete truth and risk collapsing the careful containment that had preserved reality for generations. The silver beneath my skin burned with warning as I considered this heresy. The camera on my desk clicked its shutter reprovingly, though no one had touched it. The photograph on the wall flickered between iterations, faces changing, chairs emptying and filling across countless versions of the same eternal moment. "Let me show you something," I said finally, reaching for my journal. "But first, you need to understand. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some are meant to be guarded." Her eyes widened as I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the complete circuit of silver that mapped the boundaries between worlds. Recognition dawned in her expression. She had begun seeing similar markings on her own skin, though hadn't understood their significance. "There are worse things than losing someone," I told her. "There's losing everything because you couldn't let them go." The Christmas tree lights reflected in her tears as understanding began to penetrate. The photograph on the wall settled into its current iteration, showing the Winthrop family with Thomas and Elizabeth clearly visible, their features carrying subtle traces of everyone who had ever been absorbed into the cycle. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "If you're supposed to lead me into it, why warn me?" The silver in my veins pulsed with disapproval, but I continued nonetheless. "Because every cycle needs a choice," I said, "and this time, I'm choosing differently." The veil between Christmas present and Christmas past thins to transparency as snow falls outside my window. 1 year has passed since Eliza made her choice, to walk away from the cycle, to carry her grief naturally, rather than contain it within the eternal photograph. Her decision created a fracture in the pattern, a divergence never before permitted. Geneva warned there would be consequences. "The cycle exists for a reason," she reminded me. "Some grief creates its own cosmology. Without containment, reality itself becomes questionable. Yet nothing catastrophic occurred. No ancient entities escaped through unguarded doors. No reality collapsed under grief's impossible gravity. Instead, something unexpected happened. The photograph changed. This morning, examining the Winthrop family Christmas portrait, I noticed the two children no longer resemble amalgams of countless absorbed researchers. Thomas and Elizabeth now appear simply as themselves, two Victorian children preserved in a moment of holiday solemnity. The spectral figures have vanished from the edges of the frame. The empty chairs remain empty. Most remarkably, when I look at the photograph now, I feel nothing but academic interest. No pull, no resonance, no sense of recursive obligation. The silver tracings beneath my skin have faded to barely visible scars. I've documented everything in a manuscript that will remain sealed for 100 years. Not to create breadcrumbs for future researchers, but to explain to future custodians that compassion may prove stronger containment than endless cycles of absorption. My doorbell rings. Through frosted glass, I see Eliza's silhouette, accompanied by a smaller figure, her sister's child whom she's raising as her own. Not a replacement for her daughter, but a genuine new connection. Grief and love coexisting without becoming dangerous apertures. On my desk sits the camera, now powerless, its brass fittings dulled with disuse. The bell on my mantelpiece has gone silent. Geneva hasn't visited in months. Some cycles, once broken, reveal themselves as unnecessary prisons rather than essential containment. Some grief, when faced directly, loses its reality-bending potential. The Winthrop photograph now hangs in the university's historical collection, Properly labeled as an interesting example of Victorian Christmas portraiture, nothing more. Researchers examine it without falling into its trap. The chain has been broken, yet I remain vigilant. Other photographs exist, other frames containing dangerous apertures, other cycles maintaining necessary quarantines. Some doors should remain guarded. Some grief does create cosmologies that require containment. I've become something new, neither fully custodian nor completely free, but a bridge between understanding. I watch for the telltale signs. Researchers obsessed with specific images, historical mysteries that attract the grief-stricken, photographs that seem to change when viewed from different angles. Tonight, as Christmas approaches, I will join Eliza's family celebration. There will be empty chairs at the table, acknowledgments of those absent but remembered. There will be a holiday portrait taken, a genuine moment captured, not an eternal prison constructed. And I will remember that frames can contain without trapping, that memory can preserve without distorting, that grief can exist without becoming a doorway. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.